Hello, welcome to Basketball Ireland's Performance Conference in association with Pinergy. For this session, we're going to be discussing the US collegiate basketball system, in particular what coaches are looking for from players that they're trying to recruit. I have two great guests today and people that are well used to Ireland. First of all, welcome back. I suppose you're not in the country, Drew, but been over to Ireland plenty of times. Drew is a former NCAA Division I point guard with Lafayette, where after finishing his playing days, he went on to become the top assistant coach with Lafayette. Drew is currently working at one of the top prep schools in the US. He's head coach of Choate Academy in New England. Drew, I'll come back to you in a second just to get a few of your thoughts, but great to see you again. We had a quick chat before we came online, and delighted that you could give us a bit of your time today. We're also joined by former Irish international Paul Cummins. Paul has a huge amount of personal experience on today's subject, having travelled from Ireland to go through the full US schooling system as he finished high school in North Carolina before attending South Kent Prep School and finally getting a full NCAA Division I scholarship to attend Lafayette. Following a successful college career, Paul played professionally in Switzerland and Scotland before choosing to further his education with a master at UUJ while playing in our very own Men's Super League, and he's currently the managing director of Sea Change. Guys, great to see you. The smart ones amongst people would have recognized the fact that there was a Lafayette connection between you. So I suppose both played at the top level in the States, which is what we'll be talking a lot about. Just want to give us a couple of your best memories, how you came together, how your paths crossed during basketball.
Yeah, just from my perspective, I first came across Coach Dawson at Lafayette. So when I entered there as a freshman, Coach Dawson was an assistant coach at the time, and we hit it off right away. Might be that Irish connection, Drew, I'm not sure, but Coach was really helpful to me on a personal player development point of view. Spent a lot of time with me developing my game and finding my niche within the Lafayette system. And the whole 4 years I was there, Coach Drew was there, and the whole time, I think, Drew, by the time I finished, you were nearly top assistant. So yeah, that's where our paths crossed initially. So coach-athlete relationship, and we became fast friends. And after I graduated and continued to play and coach, setting up SDA here in Ireland, Coach Drew was one of the first people I thought to get involved with SDA, and he's been around at the SDA camps over the last number of years to add his advice to the campers at that. So it's we've been I suppose coach athlete and then friends ever since as well, and we enjoy doing this type of thing.
Well, that's the best part of coaching, is the post, well, you hope anyway, the post relationship with the guys you coach. So I'm fortunate to call Paul one of my closer friends, obviously in basketball, but just in general in my life. And Matt, I've had a chance to get to know you, so I appreciate you bringing me on and just share some of my experiences. And it's a crazy time that we're all living in. It doesn't matter where you are in the world with COVID-19. And so anything like this, any programming to help, the players that we coach and help facilitate their futures is much appreciated. And I feel grateful to be a part of this with Basketball Ireland. I'll tell you, one of my best memories of Paul, and I'm not surprised he's gone on to do a lot of different things in life, is I'm walking by, this is when I was obviously an assistant coaching Paul, in College Hill in Easton, PA, and I'm walking by the Performing Arts Center on the campus of Lafayette, and I go in and I was trying to teach myself the piano, and I decided as a coach, as a young coach, I'd like to try to broaden my horizons and learn an instrument. So I'm in the Performing Arts Center, and I'm walking down the hallway, and I have my beginners, Piano for Dummies book, and I'm walking down, and I hear this guy I hear whoever was in there, I didn't know at the time, but playing the piano and it sounded great. And I couldn't help but sort of, poke my head in, and there it's Paul. And Paul's sitting there, sound like Mozart. And, a couple days before, he had dropped, 4 threes in a game and obviously had a heck of a career at Lafayette. So Paul, was one of the good ones, and I'm not just saying as a basketball player, just in terms of, how well-rounded he is and what he brought to Lafayette And again, I feel fortunate to have this relationship with him. I can give you all the dirt and all the skinny on
Yeah.
another call. You know, I know we
Didn't
have.
know he was a pianist. Now I have to say,
we
getting a new
go
boss.
we can go any which way with this. But in terms of Paul, you know, I just thoroughly enjoyed that player-coach relationship with him, and then obviously how it's unfolded since. So.
Well, Drew, I'll try to throw you that $50 after the call. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I just saw my Cash App just dinged on my phone, so we're 1 for 1. So, but I'm happy to be here, Matt. Thank you.
Well, I suppose, like, having gone through, you know, the full range, leaving Ireland and going to play in the States, what are the big things that parents and players need to think about and look out for if they want to follow the same route and go out and play college basketball in the States?
Yeah, well, the first thing to know is how much of a challenge it is, and just purely statistically, it's not an easy thing to accomplish because, you know, 1% or less than 1% of high school athletes in America end up playing college basketball. And then if you take that little sample size, less than 1% of those are foreign players, you know, and typically, you know, coaches would look at more European powerhouse countries, the likes of Lithuania, for example, and Spain. And so Ireland, you know, being an Irish basketball player and wanting to play in the States is a challenge. So that's the first thing. But there are things you can do to help. I would say, you know, having a good network is key, Matt. You know, and some people have contacts in the US. If you don't have contacts, can you make contacts? Can you actually email coaches, look up schools, whether it's prep school or high schools or colleges, and actually make that initial approach? And that's kind of a grind. I mean, people have to show initiative around that because you can create a network, but it takes time and work and effort. You know, there's obviously an element of luck, which was certainly the case for me. I was on the Irish junior national team, and I got kind of spotted at the time by Bill Dooley, who had a contact in Raleigh, North Carolina, who coached the high school team there. So he was the one who suggested I would do well with that. And from there, then I had to kind of work from high school to prep school to ultimately to get to Lafayette, where Drew was. Hard work. You know, you have to be a standout. You really do. And I would say not just, let's say, in Ireland, but you have to bring something to the table in the American game because it's such a talented pool of players over there. And the other big piece of advice I would say is that to prepare effectively is really to look after your academic side too, because if you're academically sound and strong, you're just widening your net of possibilities. You know, so if you think about the types of possibilities that could be there, even though they're all a challenge, you've got high school, which would suit some people and some situations. You've got prep school, which is where Coach Drew coaches at now. You've got the college and university realm, and that includes Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, NAIA, junior colleges. So there's a lot of opportunity, even though it's challenging. But the more academically sound you are, Matt, the broader your net is. Which really helps. And then there's certain things that even if you are a very talented player, you have to have, like your SATs, for example, and you can take them here in Ireland. There's only a couple of specific places you can do it, but having those things in line as you're going and creating a network will really help. And there is a bit of luck involved. There's no doubt about that.
About a few of those things in a second. Drew, just wanted to go to you there in terms of obviously being an assistant coach at Division 1, you've done a lot of recruiting and even in your current position. What are the kind of things that US coaches are looking for? And in particular, what are they looking for in Irish-based or European-based players?
Yeah, I actually like to piggyback what Paul said towards the end there with the academic index. You know, there's what's called the AI. It's an academic index that we follow here in the States. And, you know, obviously there's varying degrees of that, depending on what type of school, what tier school, what level. And then obviously down through prep school, there's different types of prep schools. But the biggest thing I would say to kids in Ireland and kids just around the world, you have to be academically sound. I mean, for a whole host of reasons. I mean, all this will end, life will go on past basketball, but specific to being recruited to the States, you know, there's over 500,000 basketball players here in the US, you know? So for us to even start, unless you're such an exclusive player and such an exclusive group, for someone at any level in the US to pursue someone abroad and obviously in Ireland, they have to know that they're going to be able to handle the schoolwork. They're going to have to know, during the recruiting process, that that's going to be someone that they can get through the admissions office without much of a hassle or friction. And then that they can obviously do the work and that they're diligent academically. So there's not other issues in terms of going away, from home for the first time or what have you. So, I've seen this happen quite a bit where you'll get a lead, as Paul also said, the contacts and network is vital. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But I've seen this before where you'll get an email or you'll get pinged by someone in your network and you'll see the initial highlights. You'll do your homework and then it gets to that transcript and the prospect, the kid is a mediocre student at best. And you sigh because, that's an uphill climb. It's an uphill climb if you're not a good student trying to matriculate to a lot of these schools in general here, in general in the States. But certainly for an international player, you have to stand out, as Paul just said. So one of the first things you got to make sure you take care of is your academic indexing. So for all the young Irish players out there, and this is, across, men and women, you have to make sure how you do one thing is how you do everything. We always tell the kids that. It's one of the quotes we use at Choate. How you do one thing is how you do it. You can't show up and be a baller and not ball out in the classroom. And I don't mean to sound corny, but again, as coaches, we know that a lot of the inconsistencies about these kids comes back to hurt them when they finally get to a point where they're trying to achieve their dreams. So academics would be one thing. The other thing is, to be very honest with you, a lot of times when you're looking abroad, you're looking for something different or something you don't have. So size would be one of the first things that would pop off the page. And that's anywhere. But, if you see a kid at 6'9", 6'10", there's not a lot of those kids, players walking the earth, right? So the reality is if you can come across something that's going to be different for you in your program, naturally that's going to be appealing to you. So, we always say, even with the Sport Dream Academy, lean into what you're good at. If you're a knockdown shooter, then let's make sure you're doing your work early. You're understanding how to move within the offense so you can showcase your shot. If you're a lead guard or a point guard, let's lean into those strengths, and minimize the weaknesses, especially when, as Paul says, you're trying to be in that shop window. So, I mean, we can talk any which way about it, but I would say I've seen a lot of times where you start to have an interest in a kid and just it stops at the first conversation because academically you're not going to mess with that kid because it's going to be too much of a hassle as an international student.
So you're saying listen to your parents. You sound like everyone's parent there. Concentrate on school. What's you're in prep school yourself, so in terms of going to a prep school or going to high school before college for players coming out of Ireland, how much does that increase their chances of getting to college? In terms of just giving them that grounding and finding it easier to be seen before they get there.
Yeah, Drew can talk to this as well for sure from his background. For me, I think it's a really important thing. It's very, very extremely challenging to, let's say, go through the Irish system, do your Leaving Cert and go straight to a university. It really is, unless you've got a connection in there and you're talking about a broad range of skill level and academic level in the different university opportunities, let's say. But that's an extremely challenging thing. It's not happened at all much, if any. I know Mick Bree went, I think, directly to Davidson, but it doesn't typically happen. So if you can get over there in either the high school or prep school, situation prior, it really is a good thing to do for a number of reasons. I think, firstly, the transitioning to the American game is really important. It's such a different game, Matt. It's far more physical, far more athletic. The coaching is much more intense. The defense you face is much more intense, and the ability to actually get over there and figure out where your niche is quickly. And look, not to say there's a lot of talented Irish players that can compete, that have competed, that have shown that this is possible, but it's an initial shock, trust me, and I know that from personal experience. And the same with the school system. It's good to get in there and see the differences, and finally then there's that cultural thing where you're leaving your friends and your family, and you have to know that you're able for that. So even I would say that if you're young enough, like if you're about to go into a TY year, for example, and you've got an opportunity to maybe try high school, I think that's a really good opportunity. if you're beyond that, you know, typically might be the best scenario would be to actually complete your Irish education, but then try and get a prep school year in the States. It is more challenging. I know Drew will comment, like usually coaches in the US love to get players as young as possible, because that gives them much more time to develop within a program. But if you're kind of in your fifth year and you're nearly done with the Irish school system, if you can try and identify a prep school year where you're coming in immediately and adding value academically and on the court, it gives you that transition year, and hopefully it gives you enough time to perform, to be spotted and by the college systems and offered some type of scholarship or financial aid package at whatever level you can play at, whether it's Division 1 or it's Division 3, for example.
How important is it for players to find the right school, especially in prep school and things like that? And how would they go about finding out which school will be right for them?
Yeah, I mean, the fit is absolutely critical. You know, one thing I do want to just say about Paul's, if you don't mind, if I can add to what Paul just said, I thought it was well said, and I think it can't be emphasized enough. And this kind of leads into even finding the right fit. There's really there's a fork in the road here. You know, if you're a CJ Fulton, you know, if you're the kid, you know, a Sullivan who's now at Florida Tech, you know, obviously some of the kids that we've had, you know, we've been fortunate to have at SDA, at the Sport Dream Academy. I mean, those kids were high level kids, you know, so they had the luxury of, regardless of what fork in the road they took, whether they went as an underclassman for a number of years or a post grad, they were just at a different level of talent. And that was, you know, CJ Fulton, you know, he can compete at any level in the States, you know, so again, a little bit of a different breed of player. But for your average kid looking to come to the States, what I recommend is, again, trying to go for multiple years. Now, again, as Paul said, there's some issues there in terms of, you know, the Irish education versus the American system. But without getting in the weeds with it, conceptually, if you can go for a few years to American high school or prep school, I do think it aids, you know, for the reasons that Paul mentioned. One, you have more face time with the coach. You can get acclimated, obviously, to the program, but also the community, the campus, the school, et cetera. But it also doesn't put as much pressure on the process, meaning, you know, even the top prep schools, you know, usually you're only getting a class worth of kids, you know, so there's very few prep schools that will get 8, 9, 10 PGs. There's a few out there, don't get me wrong, but on average, most prep schools, especially the prep schools that are also good academic schools, are only going to get 3 or 4 PGs a year. So if you're constantly trying to thread the needle as an Irish player going for a post-grad year, you're up against it much more than if you were trying to matriculate or go in as an underclassman, which is usually a broader pool of students and athletes. Does that make sense? So if you're going for sophomore, junior, you know, repeat junior year, there's not as much pressure on that coach to say, you know, because by post-grad, you know, when a kid's a PG, especially, you know, at the level, I mean, I feel like I'm a college coach now. It's a high level here. And Paul will tell you from his days at South Kent. I mean, there was, you know, dozens and dozens of scholarship players every year coming out of the league that I even coach in. So for you to try to thread the needle all the time as a PG, you're putting the coach in a position where he's got to know that you're a higher level player. And when I say higher level, you know, I was actually talking to the Winchendon coach where CJ Fulton is, you know, just recently. And he said he doesn't ever want to go below that level. So think about that. You have less than 1% of players going to play Division I. You have 3.5% going to play college in the States in general. That's either 1, 2, or 3. So you're kind of up against it to begin with. But then if you're only looking at the post-grad as your way to the States, I think you're being short-sighted. Now, again, I don't know all the weeds about the Irish educational system, but if you can make it work where you can go for a few years to the U.S., I think that puts you in a better position to get recruited, get in, and then obviously go on to college.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just to talk about that, it really does. That's where it's a big decision, and we talk about this, Matt. Like, it really is. Every good player in Ireland knows that they want to get to the US. I was the same way. Everyone through SDA is the same way. They know that's how they're going to kind of extend their their talent and actually get it fostered in the right direction. It's kind of like the way Americans want to come play soccer over here. You know, it's just the natural way of things, but it needs to work for the family situation. So Drew's definitely right in that if you do have an opportunity as a first, second, third year going into the transition year, if you've got a contact or a network where you could get over and you've shown that you're talented or you've got something unique, you're a good athlete, it's a nice thing to look at that point. If you're in fifth year and you've started the process here on the kind of leave and start side, it's a big decision. And you know, people need to understand that it is a gamble. You could still go, but there's a bit more risk because if it doesn't work out, obviously you're coming back and you're going to have to complete your high school education in Ireland, your secondary school education, and get to college. So these are all things you really do need to think about, parents and kids. And it really does it comes down to, I think, what type of situation might be in front of you in the US and what level of risk are you willing to live with. And that's an individual thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd like to add that because that actually segues into the question you asked about the fit. One of the things that can be frustrating, especially as I've gone overseas and have been involved in different initiatives with you guys and what have you, is sometimes, and again, I think, you know, you guys with Sport Dream Academy, Paul's made he's put an emphasis on trying to be open-minded in what we, you know, counsel these kids and parents on, you know, and one of the things that we try to counsel them on is, you know, there's a couple ways you can do this. Like everyone sees high-level prep school and post-grad. Everyone sees Division I and Division II. But there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Like one of the things that just thinking about this conversation today, you know, there's another option that's very rarely talked about when you get on conversations like this, and that's the open enrollment option here across, you know, in school districts across the U.S. So again, if you know, Paul is obviously much more educated on the concerns that Irish families have to go through and decide on, but you know, there's other things you can do, like the open enrollment option. There's a lot of school districts here in the U.S. In fact, you know, one of the coaches in our club, Coach Eco, he coaches in a school district called Madison here in Connecticut, and they have an open enrollment option where you can actually come to the public high school from, you know, internationally or from another school district. You obviously have to pay the tuition. So public school is usually free here. You'd have to pay the tuition, but that's an option to go to American high school. You know, so that's one thing in addition to prep school. Okay. Another thing in terms of college, you know, if you decide you don't want to make that big decision, you stay in Ireland to finish out, you know, there's the junior college situation. There's, you know, Division III. I mean, everyone sleeps on Division III. Division III is a great brand of basketball here in the States. I mean, Division III is littered with kids that, you know, might have, you know, were originally recruited at a higher level, but then at the end of the day, they were suited for Division III. So, you know, I hope we can touch upon that a little bit in terms of the fit. You know, the best way you can increase your chances of finding the right fit is to widen your perspective on what that fit might be. And I think that's really educating yourself to all the different ways that a kid can fulfill his dreams of coming over to the States and playing. You know, so we get really focused in on that 1% and those post-grad options, but whether it's this open enrollment option, you know, whether it's other prep schools at the B, C, D level, and then of course the different levels of college along with NAIA and JUCO, you know, there's different ways to do it. You know, again, you have to be good, you have to be talented, you have to be academically sound. But I think if anything on this tangent here that I'm going with, in terms of the fit, it's going to be hard to find the right fit if you're very narrow-minded in how you're looking at the experience and looking at the process of getting over here.
Paul, just give us a quick idea of the things that players that they have to have right now if they're looking at it going in the next year or two or trying to go. And then on the flip side to that, Drew, after Paul, what are the things that you have to see from them in order for someone to contact you and be like, oh yeah, okay, I'll look into that more?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because practically, you know, everyone's probably kind of from this seminar kind of thinking, well, what can I do right now to help? The first thing is you have to continue to work on your game. You really do, you know, even for, you know, to get to JUCO or to get to Division III, as Drew rightly pointed out, which is a highly competitive division, you have to be a standout player. And that's not just in your club, but ideally, you know, internationally. And if you're not there yet, I would encourage people to continue to work to get there, right? So working on your game is so important, emphasizing your strengths, working on your weaknesses, and improving every time or every day,
Just,
you know, and
just
that's,
on that, Paul, like, I mean, obviously you've seen a lot of the Irish players of all different age groups, you know, and I've heard you talk to players about it before, but just to give them the real simple fact of how high that level of their game needs to be compared to our average standard over here at the moment.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's honestly, it's like it's night and day. And again, this is with the caveat of saying there's a lot of talented players here. But I would say that things like, you know, there's fundamentals that have to be in place in order to play in pretty much every level in the US. And where we often fall short on that would be things like ball handling and control. So the actual, you know, like it was one of the biggest things I had to work on because we don't emphasize it that much here. We don't typically grow up with a ball in our hands. It's usually a ball at our feet in some way, shape or form. So ball handling is critical. The ability, as Drew mentioned, if you're not super tall or athletic, you have to add value in that ball handling space, the ability to shoot. Fundamentals are critical. And I think a lot of European players do bring solid fundamentals to the US game, which can be over athletic. So focusing on those fundamentals, and that just comes from practice and practice, Matt. Your body, working on your body early, eating the right stuff, getting sleep, you know, getting into a gym and working out is so important because, you know, and I knew this when I got over there, I was very, very weak physically because I hadn't really done much training here, but the level of athleticism is so high, like at the high school level, so high. The defensive intensity is so high. One thing to keep in mind too, if you're an Irish player here, is that you might be training like I did, you know, maybe 2, 3, 4 times a week with different teams, and you'd play once a week or whatever. In the US, and this is obviously when we could play before COVID, but in the US, you practice every day, and that's outside of actually working out and lifting. And this is at the high school level. So it's like a part-time job. So the intensity of the game is huge. You know, working on those things, your body, your strength, your fundamentals, and in particular your ball handling, passing, and shooting abilities will really help. And then, you know, over time, can you kind of specialize in something? Like for me, it was my specialization was shooting, and I really worked on that to get open, to extend my range, all of that type of stuff, because I knew while I was good at everything else, I wasn't good enough to, let's say, play Division One unless I really specialized in something. And I would recommend that, you know, players find what they do in that space and do it right. Yeah, so that would be a big one there, Matt. And the other thing too is just, I think a lot of times with Irish basketball, you know, if you're a good player here, you do get a sense, and I was the same. A lot of top players before they go to the States naturally will feel like they've reached a certain level, and they can take the foot off the gas. And it's only when you go over there you realize you're a million miles away from where you need to be. So don't take your foot off the gas. Always challenge yourself. If things are getting easy, make it hard. You know, work on your weaknesses and keep pushing yourself in that regard.
Andrew.
Yeah, I'd like to say this, that, you know, obviously getting better, and that we have the same issues here. You know, a lot of our kids are waiting for the next tweet or the next like or the next, you know, endorsement in some way or another. But the bottom line is get better. And I think a lot of kids and coaches, for that matter, being hunkered down with COVID are being forced to think outside the box, you know. But the goodness in that is if we persevere through that, hopefully that sharpens all of us in terms of just the process of daily improvement, because it really has been a practice season for most of us. I mean, it's been workouts, it's been very limited. There hasn't been the games that we're all used to. So absolutely get better. But then I just want to add to that, get honest feedback. And I think one of the things that you're seeing in Ireland, I mean, you're obviously, you know, senior technical director, and we know Paul's background with SDA and his playing career. There's people now in Ireland that have committed. I've said this before, and it's why I enjoy coming over there. You're seeing growth in that. You're seeing, you know, better and better players. You're seeing a process. You're seeing the infrastructure that you guys are very much a part of. And so there's a lot more opportunities for these kids, obviously with your dev academies, you know, the different developmental issues you're taking on, to get that honest feedback. And I think that's one of the things that kids have to do before they start reaching out is get a feel for what level they are. And then, lean into that truth, and you might want a few opinions on it, but a lot of kids will start reaching out with no clue on, what their strengths are, what they need to get better at, what level they are. So, and then I would say this, that once you start to go into that process, there's a lot of different ways to look up these schools, and you want to research the schools. I think that most of these schools have done a great job with putting right on their website what's needed, whether it's academically or what the coach wants, certainly a highlight film, and then followed by footage. So there's definitely a process there, but, tap into the infrastructure that's being put in place in Ireland and how it's improved and the different coaches there. Like you mentioned, Pat Price, he knows the landscape. I mean, he was in the US for many years. So, seek out different people like the two of you that can give you honest feedback on what these levels are about before you start spinning your wheels trying to cultivate opportunities overseas, or here in the States.
And just to add to that, Matt, so the basketball end is an absolute critical aspect, like in terms of what people can do now, just at the fundamental level. Outside of that, though, there's the academic piece. So because any time you actually get to the States, they do a transition between what your grades are here versus what they might be in a particular region in a high school or prep school. They do a conversion. So that the higher your scores are here, the better they'll convert, which again broadens that net. So you have more opportunities. You can take the SAT, which I would recommend doing. It's a requirement anyway. So even if something does come to fruition, one of the things you're going to have to do before you go over is, unless you go over at a very early stage, like as a freshman or sophomore, you're probably going to have
just
to
give
take
us an idea of the kind of the ages there for the SAT. What age would they be doing the SAT compared to the Irish system?
Usually the SAT is done junior and senior year. Isn't that right, Drew?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. And so typically, like, that would be, if you think about it here, you're talking fifth year and above.
And then if you're gonna, and sorry to cut you off there, Paul. If you're gonna try to go as a reclass, or you're gonna go for multiple years, again, a big decision for an Irish family. But if you're going to pursue that route, then you need to get either the SSAT, which is sort of a precursor to the SAT. You'll want to get that a little bit earlier, or the PSAT, which I know a lot of folks might be familiar with. So those are two tests that are precursors to your SAT or ACT. Now, do you have the ACT in Ireland? I'm not. No, just the SAT.
You might be able to take it there's a couple of testing centers. Now there's one in Dublin, but they don't run frequently. So it's a couple of times a year, I think, that you can actually sit the SAT, and they might have the ability for the ACTs and stuff like that as well. But really, like, again, I wouldn't push ahead with that unless okay, there's opportunities here. But if you see that there is, it's going to be a necessity. So if you're at that age bracket where it's kind of fifth year and above, I would recommend looking into that, because they will ask for that. And in the US system, the two aspects to get to college, there's the SAT, which you can take here, and if you get to the States, you can retake it, and see, can you increase your score? And the higher the SAT, the higher your net is. And then there's what's called the grade point average in the US, and that's your academic record, and that's where your A's, B's, C's, D's, whatever you score here in Ireland, will get converted into what's called a GPA, grade point average. And the higher your GPA is, again, the more options you'll have from a college point of view. So the academic side is critical. If you think that the basketball is key, academics and making sure you've got those things looked at, and at least do your research to see, well, if the opportunity arises, where can I take the SAT and when? And what are my grades like? And then the final piece really is, as Drew mentioned, but it is fostering that network. And that takes effort, that takes energy and attention. You can typically contact and identify different schools at different levels. And in order to get coaches interested, and this is a big thing, usually you would need to have some type of highlights as well as a profile, which includes your academic information. But you're also going to have some full game footage, because if Drew gets an email tomorrow from a promising kid here, and he likes the look of the profile, academically sound, likes the 2-minute highlight film just to pique the interest, the first thing Drew will ask is, do you have a full game? So, capturing that footage is really important too, Matt.
that's one thing I was going to say, Drew. Pull the sports up there on that footage you mentioned it earlier. Just the highlight bit. What can you kind of identify exactly the things that you would be looking for that would really pique your interest? Before they get to just to get you to look at a full game footage.
Sure. Well, first of all, I've never seen a bad highlight film. So
I have.
Paul's, but to Paul's point, so the full game footage will definitely be something that you'll want to look at. I think the biggest thing is less. It's just these highlight films have gotten so cute. It's like they're speeding up the first step. Speeding up a frame. There's all kinds of bells and whistles. Just no annex. Just have it a simple, clean. 2.5. I always say 2.5 to 3 minutes. I think if you go beyond 3 minutes, you got to remember just in terms of these percentages, and COVID-19 has made the whole landscape even crazier. Because the NCAA has just issued a blanket waiver across Division 1, 2, and 3. So everybody that's playing this year in the NCAA across all those levels will get their year back. So even if you have certain number of schools that are going to go ahead with the year, it used to be where once you hit a threshold of games, you lost your eligibility. Like once you played, don't quote me on this, but 13, 14 games in a college basketball season, now you were not eligible to redshirt or repeat that year. And you were on to the next year, sophomore to junior, senior, what have you. Now what the NCAA is saying because of COVID is everyone, regardless of the amount of participation that ends up happening this college, this season, everyone can come back. So, I was talking to one of my players who's actually a freshman at Lafayette, Ryan Zambi, who's a heck of a player for me at Choate. And he said, Coach, I feel like I'm a prep school kid again. I'm getting a free year at Lafayette to learn the system and get acclimated with Coach O and just with the school. And so that is adding even more, of a tightness to this whole thing in terms of the numbers and percentages, So you have to understand that these college coaches, these recruiters are going through hundreds and hundreds of films, right? So if you have a highlight film that's 5.5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, it's too long. That's your commercial. That's why it shouldn't be cute. It should be, straightforward. You shouldn't have, I like all kinds of different music, don't get me wrong, but it should be appropriate music. The focus should be on the play. It should be on what you do well. If you're a shooter, you should have highlights of you coming off screens, hitting shots, running the floor, spotting up, hitting shots. If you're a playmaker, more of a point lead guard, it should obviously show that you can make those plays and convert and score, but it should show that you understand how to play with pace, whether you're making a nice clean gap and kick, making good, quick decisions on the basketball floor. If you're a big guy, a frontline player, I know that's a dying breed, post players, but show that you can, you can establish the block, that you can chin check, that you have poise in the post, that you can finish with both hands, but all this hoop-de-doo stuff that technology has allowed kids to rework their game and put on highlight films, you can't cheat that because, college coaches, this is their livelihood. Even at my level, where, I do other things outside of coaching basketball at the high school prep level, but even at the prep level, I feel like a college coach, it's highly competitive. So we're going to do our diligence on whether that highlight film actually converts to a full game. So the cleaner your highlight film, short and sweet, that's your commercial. As Paul says, you're in the shot window for those 2.5, 3 minutes, and then have a sound, at least one full game, if not two. I think 2 is pretty suitable, is pretty reasonable. And then the other thing I'd like to say about the network is, again, be appropriate when you reach out to different people in your network, especially if you're trying to cultivate a new contact. But when I get an email from a Coach Hall, a Matt Hall, or a Coach Cummings, or a Bill Dooley, or a Pat Price, or Paul Kelleher, that's going to mean more to me because I know that kid's been, again, this goes in light of the honest feedback. I know that kid is developing with the right people. He's in the right programming. He's being coached there's good coaches everywhere, but just in terms of networking and understanding how that works, again, it's who you know. If you have the right people that we know endorsing you, that's going to push that highlight film and that footage and profile through a little bit further. So, I don't know if that helps. Obviously, having transcripts attached and showing, going back to my first answer, showing that you're a solid student and there's not going to be any issues academically. So, to me, it's a 2.5-minute highlight film, nice and clean. You don't have to send the full game footage the first email. The first email should be a clean 1 to 2 paragraph introduction of yourself, what program, what country, what club you're associated with, who you've been coached by, just a few teaser things to pull the interest of the recruiter or coach. And this is at any level, Division I all the way down through, even some of this open enrollment option, the high school, prep school coaches. And then have that link to that highlight film, have all the accurate contact information. Do not send an email that doesn't have a formal greeting to it. Sometimes I'll get texts from recruits here in the US, and it's like, what's up? Hit me back. I'm interested in coming to Choate. Come on, guys. I know the devices have made everything pretty informal here, the way we communicate with each other. But, this is a big deal. We're talking, going back to Paul's percentages, less than 1% to D1 and 3.5% of the world's basketball players play in U.S. colleges. So yeah. I don't know if that helps at all, if that's kind of what you're looking for on that,
I know.
And then from there, it kind of goes, you the full game footage. And if you are good and you have something to offer that's different, then a whole, another level of the recruiting and building that relationship follows. So.
Oh, that's great. I suppose we're cutting it fine on time now, so I'm conscious of getting wrapped up. But just, I suppose, give us a couple of final things, Paul. First of all, you just on, we've talked high and wide, I suppose. Also, maybe a couple of pitfalls or things to look out for when looking to make this route.
Yeah. Well, firstly, just keep in mind to be realistic. It's always important to chase, in any way, shape, or form, to chase our dreams, but do it realistically. Every family needs to be realistic while continuing to work. And when you're honest with yourself, you'll understand what the best role is for you, where your ceiling might be. And when you have that kind of clear kind of thinking behind you, you can set your level and your expectations properly and pursue them. And I think that's an important starting point. Certainly just get the fundamentals in place, keep working on your game, take care of your academics, and then look at the fundamental things that are required. Like Drew said, can you get highlights and game footage? Can you look into what might be required along the lines of SATs, for example, if you're at that level? Can you connect with a network that can actually get the ball rolling at the level that you're focused on? But the other thing just to keep in mind in terms of pitfalls, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, that's a really important thing. Like there's no doubt there will be many more kids from Ireland that will play in the US, right? But if you're not at that stage or level, can you make your Super League team as a 17-year-old? That's a great goal. Can you do that? Are you good enough to do that? Can you make your local club team as an underage player? There's a lot of those things that are important, and to understand too that there's other options outside of the US. Like there's scholarship options here in Ireland to go to college, which are great opportunities. Same in the UK. And no matter what you end up doing, if basketball carries you forward to another level, you need to understand that it's not easy. You're going to miss your family. Trust me, I know that from firsthand experience. And you have to have the right personality to cope with that. And again, that's where you need to be honest with yourself. Is that something you can do? Because there's a lot of stories where kids have gone and come back 6 months later. And the final thing is just to remember that basketball in your career does have a shelf life. So no matter what you do, just make sure that you've always got that secondary plan, which is around your academics. What are your interests outside of basketball, and cultivate that at every level.
So, little wrap up from you. What takeouts have we got?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on with what Paul said. I can't, coach at heart here. As a coach, I'd say you got to continue to get better. Just if anything, I don't know who's listening, who's going to be watching this, who will be watching this. But the bottom line is, even if you don't get to where you thought you were going to go, if you're present to what you're doing, if you obsess the process of daily improvement, this is regardless, basketball, with respect to this, but just life in general, you can at least look yourself in the mirror and say that you were fully engaged. And what I find are kids and players that stay fully engaged, yeah, it may not work out perfect or the ideal, but it ends up pretty good. And and you can at least look back on your body of work and say that you gave it a shot. And there's a lot of growth in that, in terms of the fit. I'll just go back to what I said earlier on the call. You can increase your chances of finding the right spot and fit if you're open-minded. Paul just mentioned again, like, be open-minded to many ways of getting this done, whether it's playing in Ireland past, the immediate level you're at there, or again, maybe a different situation here in the States, and then I just want to give you, if I can just give you two websites I think would really help out the families and players here in Ireland. Yeah. And this is, again, with respect to coming over here and prep school and whatnot. One is the National Association of Independent Schools. So even if you just put that in, Google or what have you, that's a great website. Again, National Association of Independent Schools. It has all the boarding schools, all the prep schools, links to the website, requirements to get in. We didn't talk much about, the financial aid process, but that's a whole nother animal. But all that is spelled out. That website that association does a really good job. And then the New England Recruiting Report, actually the editor, the founder and editor was the previous coach at Choate, so I know him well. And you can get NERR, and basically most of the prep schools are in New England, the concentration of schools. So you can kind of look at the profile. And the reason I like that site is you can also see, to Paul's point, the level of player that these coaches are recruiting in these schools to give you more perspective on everything we're talking about. And then lastly, the NCAA eligibility site. I don't know if you've mentioned that to your families and players, but if you just go to the NCAA site and click on the eligibility tab, they have a whole scrolling PDF of the requirements for international players. So, and I think they've upgraded that over the last couple of years. And I think it's really detailed and they do a really good job with it. So, for what it's worth.
Great, guys. Look, it's a really relevant topic at the moment. A lot of people trying to go that route, as they always have been. I suppose the world's got a lot smaller, especially during COVID, where people have learned how to use, the technology a little bit more. But some great insight. I mean, there's a million more questions, I'm sure. Paul, I know we've another session with you coming up, and on December the 13th, where we'll cover this subject again. So for players and parents that will have questions, Paul's going to answer some questions there. He's also going to have Sean Flood and John Cowell, that Irish players that are currently playing professionally that have just recently finished Division I scholarships in the States. So they'll have a little bit of experience and be able to answer some of your questions.
We might get Coach Drew on there too, Matt. We'll see. I'll work on him. Well,
keep on to him. Yeah, it'd be great to have him back. So we'll put those details out on the website before it. So feel free to tune in back for that. For today, thanks very much for everyone to tune into this session. There are a range of other discussions as part of the Basketball Ireland Performance Conference, so please check out our social channels for more details. Finally, it just goes to thank the two guys, Dawson and Paul Cummins, for their time today. I mean, an excellent discussion. I think we could have gone on all day, and maybe had we been in the country in person, we could continue afterwards. But guys, thanks for joining us, and great to see you all, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Good seeing you guys. Yep.